I got my first bona fide paid film review assignment in September of 2021. For a few months at that point, I'd been reviewing TV shows for the movies and TV section of a certain gaming website, which will remain nameless to protect myself, although I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it before on this channel, so if you really want to know, you can go digging. Anyway, after I'd done a few TV reviews, my editor felt confident enough to trust me with some big tentpole movies. The first film I was assigned to review was Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which I really enjoyed. And over the next couple of months, I went on to review every major release from Dune to Ghostbusters Afterlife to No Time to Die. But here's the thing, the gaming team at the same website had simultaneously commissioned one of their guys to review all the same films. So somehow, for months, the site had two different writers writing two different reviews every time a new movie came out, and no one noticed. I should clarify now that everything I say from this point on is pure speculation, because no one ever told me about it, and I never asked anyone about it because I don't like asking awkward questions, so I've just pieced it together based on the clues. Around December 2021, when this clerical error was discovered by the higher-ups, as I understand it, their inspired solution was simply to wipe the past few months of my hard work from existence, and give all the best movie reviewing gigs going forward to this other guy. There was a brief window when my reviews were tagged onto the bottom of his as a second opinion, before they decided to just delete mine entirely. I was thrown the occasional bone when I had early access to a movie like Don't Look Up or Top Gun Maverick, and that was just based on when they arrived in UK cinemas, not the perks of the press. But most of the time I was passed over in favor of, the other guy, who I've never actually spoken to, so I don't know what he's like. I'm sure he's a nice man, he probably didn't even know any of this was going on. There were a couple of times when I was assured this other guy wasn't reviewing a certain film and that the gig was mine, so I watched it, wrote up my review, went to post it on the site, and found that, lo and behold, my arch nemesis had already written and posted his own review. One unforgivable such instance was when I sat through Netflix's offensively bad Texas Chainsaw reboot about Old Man Leatherface killing a bunch of millennial gentlefuckers, only to find that the necessary panning had already been done by another critic. Watching that Texas Chainsaw reboot was a waste of my precious time, and not just because it was terrible, because it was no longer billable hours. I had to watch a lot of crappy movies and write a lot of flowery paragraphs about them, and in one fell swoop, thanks to an administrative fuck-up, all those hours of my life suddenly became meaningless. I still got paid for the work, but I'm not just in this for the money. This is my literary legacy we're talking about. For the past couple of years, I've thought of those lost reviews as a little blip in my career. But you know what? Maybe they don't have to stay lost. If my bosses don't want them, I'll publish them here instead. My reviews for Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, Ridley Scott's The Last Duel in House of Gucci, David Chase's Sopranos prequel, The Many Saints of Newark, and the Netflix originals Red Notice and The Harder They Fall, all managed to survive this merciless purge. These are the ones that didn't make the cut.
Who are you?
7 months after it was originally planned, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings has finally arrived in theaters. Set in a post-Endgame world, it sees a master martial artist in hiding being drawn back home to confront his father, the real Mandarin and the true leader of the Ten Rings terrorist organization. Through all the family drama, exposition-filled flashbacks, and MCU world building, director Destin Danielle Greaves never loses sight of the most important element of superhero movies: fun. The script, credited to Dave Callahan, Andrew Lanham, and Cretton, does little to shake up the familiar Marvel movie formula, but it has more than enough laugh-out-loud gags, kinetic martial arts fight scenes, and breathtaking fantasy visuals to make up for it. Shang-Chi is one of the most deliriously entertaining movie-going experiences in recent memory, and a treat for action comedy fans. Marvel's casting guru Sarah Finn has nailed it once again. With the perfect combination of humor, pathos, and leading man charisma, Simu Liu will make a more than welcome addition to the Avengers lineup. Any MCU star needs the comic timing to pull off quippy one-liners and the dramatic nuance to convincingly grieve a parent or doubt their own abilities. But Leo's performance goes a step further than a standard superhero turn. The jarring tonal shifts between comedic moments and dramatic moments can often feel disingenuous in Marvel films, as the character instantly switches from cracking jokes to feeling sad. But Leo figures out these tonal shifts organically. Shang-Chi's story reuses a lot of the same character conflicts seen in other MCU movies. Daddy issues, a dead mom, a chosen one figure suffering from imposter syndrome. However, the extensive flashbacks filling in his family history help to break up the formulaic plot, and the fast-paced plotting keeps the story moving forward from scene to scene, never sticking around in one location long enough to become dull. There's a slight lull in the second act with a relentless barrage of exposition over dinner, but a jaunt through a moving forest into a hidden fantasyland sees to that. A lot of Marvel movies and the recent Disney Plus series have totally unengaging fight scenes. The actual action becomes incomprehensible in a dizzying frenzy of cuts between actors and their stunt doubles. Thanks to Cretton's sparing use of cuts and his immensely skilled stunt team's unparalleled physicality, Shang-Chi has some of the greatest fight scenes in the MCU. Many of the movie's fight sequences are captured in long takes, so the audience can absorb every punch, kick, and 10 rings powered smackdown. They all have a unique twist too, like taking place on a moving bus, or on several floors of scaffolding on the side of a skyscraper. The latter gives the martial artists plenty of metal bars to swing around on, as well as raising the stakes with the threat of a 500-foot fall into a crowded street. Shang-Chi aims to rectify one of the MCU's most controversial twists. After Iron Man 3's trailers teased the Mandarin as the big bad who would bring down Tony Stark, he was revealed to be a beer-swilling, footy-loving actor hired by Aldrich Killian to act as the face of his terrorist cell. This twist irritated fans of the comics who knew the Mandarin as Tony's arch-nemesis and one of the most powerful characters in the Marvel Universe. The main villain in Shang-Chi is the real Mandarin, who actually hates the moniker Mandarin and goes by his real name, Wenwu. Tony Leung, the star of such classic Hong Kong action movies as Hard Boiled and Infernal Affairs, makes up for the disappointment of Iron Man 3 with a suitably sinister turn as a ruthless, narrow-minded warrior who would allow the universe to be destroyed if there's a chance it'll bring back his wife. Evil dads are plenty familiar to MCU fans after Ego and of course Thanos, but Wenwu's determination to resurrect his wife makes him subversively sympathetic. One of the biggest surprises in Shang-Chi is the return of Trevor Slattery. Introduced as a prisoner of Wenwu's, Slattery is sprung from prison and joins the heroes on their journey. Ben Kingsley was hilarious in Iron Man 3, but the enjoyment of his performance was offset by the disappointment of the fake-out. In Shang-Chi, he's just as hilarious without any of the disappointment. The prevailing fan theory was that Shang-Chi would open with the real Mandarin executing Slattery to establish his power, but giving Kingsley a supporting role as a comedic foil was a great way to redeem this polarizing character. As great as Leo, Leung, and Kingsley are, not to mention scene-stealing supporting player Michelle Yeoh, the true breakout star of Shang-Chi is Awkwafina as the titular hero's best friend Katie. It's refreshing to see an MCU movie's female lead who's just a close platonic friend of the hero instead of forcing a perfunctory romantic subplot. Katie is the movie's audience surrogate as an every woman amongst magic-wielding martial artists, and Awkwafina's typically deadpan line deliveries make her a perfect fit for that role. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings might be restrained by the same plot formula that usually holds back MCU origin movies, but its action sequences are endlessly compelling, Leo and Awkwafina's electric chemistry creates a bunch of hysterical moments, and it packs more than a few surprises. Daniel Craig's fifth and final outing in the role of James Bond, No Time to Die, has been delayed for over a year to accommodate the coronavirus pandemic. Now it's finally here, and with breathtaking action scenes, surprising emotional heft, and Craig's finest dramatic performance in the role, against all odds, No Time to Die is worth the wait. It's easily the actor's best 007 movie since Casino Royale. It doesn't have the generic action of Quantum of Solace, the distracting plot holes of Skyfall, or the muddled serialization of Spectre. It has the grit and emotional weight of Casino Royale without losing any of the series' classic sense of fun and excitement. There was a minor controversy when it was announced that No Time to Die would be the longest Bond movie ever made at 163 minutes. That's nearly 3 hours long, which is risky for an action-packed spy thriller and not an Oscar-baity historical epic. But thanks to director Cary Joji Fukunaga's masterful command of pacing, No Time to Die justifies its runtime. There's never a lull or an exposition scene that drags, and there's always a visceral set piece right around the corner. The script, penned by Fukunaga, Bond regulars Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, and Fleabag's Phoebe Waller-Bridge, is a beautiful balancing act of disparate tones. The quips are hilarious, the action sequences are thrilling, the dramatic scenes land, a rarity for this franchise, and the masked villain and his flesh-eating bioweapon are straight out of a horror movie. All these tonal shifts shouldn't work in the same movie, but Fukunaga makes it work by focusing solely on Bond's character and his journey. Ultimately, the most important aspect of Bond movies, and the reason audiences show up in droves to see them, is their action. No Time to Die has a nice wide variety of action sequences. Car chases, shootouts, brutal hand-to-hand combat. Cinematographer Linus Sandgren uses the perfect shots to frame each action scene. Dizzying aerial shots capture high-octane vehicular carnage, and tight close-ups capture ruthless fistfights. Craig bows out his stretch of the Bond franchise with one of the strongest performances ever given in the role. He continues to nail the character's coolness in moments like frisbeeing a waiter's tray to incapacitate a suspect and then finishing the drink that was on it, but he also brings plenty of emotional resonance to the proceedings. Bond has a real arc in this movie, taking stock of what's important in his life as his journey comes to an end, and Craig plays every step of that arc with pitch-perfect pathos. While Craig undoubtedly gives the strongest performance in the movie, he's backed up by strong support from both returning castmates and exciting newcomers. Familiar faces like Naomi Harris's Moneypenny and Ben Whishaw's Q are more comfortably settled into their roles than ever. Ana de Armas makes a brief but memorable appearance as Paloma, an endearingly reckless CIA agent who helps out Bond, while Billy Magnussen gives an amusing turn as Logan Ash, another CIA agent who smiles too much. The standout of the supporting cast is Lashana Lynch as Nomi, the new 007, who is both just as hyper-competent as her predecessor and relatably human. Lynch doesn't try to play Nomi as the new Bond, she rounds her out as a compelling character in her own right. Her hilariously biting back and forth barbing with Bond gives the movie's action a mismatched buddy cop angle. Rami Malek is the latest Oscar winner to take on 007 after Javier Bardem and Christoph Waltz, and he makes for a quintessential Bond villain in the role of vengeful terrorist Safin. Most Bond villain actors often feel the need to ham it up, but Malek is refreshingly understated. Malek Safin is a menacing presence whenever he appears on screen, and like all great Bond villains, he's a fun foil for 007. Since Bond movies are traditionally standalone episodic adventures that don't acknowledge the previous installment or set up the next one, Spectre's attempt to pull all of Craig's movies together in a retroactively serialized narrative was met with a mixed response. No Time to Die maintains the shared continuity of Spectre, bringing back Léa Seydoux as Dr. Madeline Swan and Christoph Waltz Blofeld, but it works a lot better here. Unlike Spectre, No Time to Die's serialization isn't just aimless MCU-inspired world building. It resolves the ongoing narrative in a surprisingly satisfying way. As a globe-trotting adventure following 007's attempts to track down a megalomaniacal villain's lair and put an end to their grandiose apocalyptic plans, No Time to Die is a welcome return to the classic Bond structure. It does little to innovate the 007 formula, but it is a great example of it, and the movie's sense of finality provides a fitting farewell for Craig's Bond. Usually Bond actors are replaced when they burn out, and their last movie is the first one to fail, critically and/or commercially. Craig is the first Bond actor whose final movie actually feels like a grand finale, and it doesn't disappoint.
Go, go, go!
After Alejandro Jodorowsky failed to get his version off the ground, and David Lynch disowned his version when it was butchered by the studio, Denis Villeneuve is the latest visionary filmmaker to dare to bring Frank Herbert's Dune to the big screen. Herbert's mind-bending sci-fi opus has famously been considered unadaptable for decades, but this 156-minute adaptation of the first half of the novel has finally done it justice. Villeneuve has a deep understanding of the worlds that Herbert conjured up, the intricacies of his story, and the complex themes at play. screenplay. In its ability to set up a grand narrative and establish a complicated fictional universe, Dune is similar to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring. Much like Jackson's film, also adapted from a literary classic long considered to be unfilmable, Villeneuve's movie works as the first chapter of a larger story and stands alone as a breathtaking epic in its own right. Since crossing over from his native Canada into big-budget Hollywood filmmaking, Villeneuve has earned a reputation for taking on extremely risky projects and pulling them off. Arrival was an alien invasion movie without a single action scene, and its final twist broke audiences' hearts around the world. Blade Runner 2049 was the belated sequel to a widely adored sci-fi classic, and despite its commercial failure, it managed to satisfy fans of the original. With Dune, Villeneuve has done it again, adapting an unwieldy, mega-scale story with care, focus, and precision. Like the director's previous sci-fi efforts, Dune sets out with sky-high ambitions and manages to go above and beyond those ambitions. There's a lot of world building to set up here. A hallucinogenic drug that makes faster than light space travel possible, the giant sandworms that lurk beneath the dunes of Arrakis, the various houses that operate under the Emperor's rule. But it's never overwhelming because Villeneuve deftly weaves it into the plot, and it never becomes boring because every setup has a payoff. Unlike a lot of adaptations of beloved franchises, Dune doesn't aim to alienate non-fans. It has everything that die-hard fans of Herbert's book series could ask of a film adaptation, but it's just as accessible to viewers who have never heard of Dune before. Timothée Chalamet is the clear star of the movie as Paul Atreides, shining in his first blockbuster starring role with his usual brooding nuance. But he's surrounded by scene-stealing supporting players. Jason Momoa gives a hugely likable turn as badass warrior Duncan Idaho. Rebecca Ferguson brings a compelling combination of anguish and mystique to Paul's superpowered mother, Lady Jessica. Stellan Skarsgård plays the villainous Baron Harkonnen as a tough-talking mob boss. In the role of Stilgar, the leader of the Fremen tribe, the great Javier Bardem delivers a captivating monologue that sums up the story's socio-political themes, as he points out the irony of two colonizing forces fighting over land that doesn't rightfully belong to either of them.
Do not trespass in our lands. The desert was ours long before you came.
As a big fan of Herbert's book, Hans Zimmer turned down the opportunity to reunite with Christopher Nolan on Tenet so he could provide the music for Dune. Rather than coming up with catchy rhythms to underscore on-screen action like John Williams or Danny Elfman, Zimmer is renowned for his mind-blowing wall of sound compositions. In Dune, he uses haunting ambient noises to complement Villeneuve's otherworldly visuals. Above all, Dune is an immersive experience. Villeneuve gives every plot point plenty of room to breathe, plunging audiences into Arrakis and its surrounding planets with the same sense of scope and scale that Jackson brought to Middle-earth and George Lucas brought to a galaxy far, far away. A lot of lazier sci-fi blockbusters plant their actors in front of blue screens and surround them with flat, computer-generated environments in post-production. But Villeneuve's crew constructed massive practical sets to bring the world of Dune to life. Jordan's Wadi Rum Valley is one of Hollywood's favorite shooting locations. Its gorgeous desert landscapes have previously been used to double as Mars in The Martian, Jeddah in Rogue One, and the Xenomorphs planet in Prometheus. But cinematographer Greg Fraser, in his first collaboration with Villeneuve, shoots the valley in a way that audiences have never seen before, making Arrakis a world of its own. The only downside of Dune is that it ends on a cliffhanger with all the story threads up in the air. Hopefully the movie will perform well enough at the box office to warrant a sequel in which Villeneuve can conclude the story he begins here. But Dune Part 1, as it's dubbed in the opening titles, doesn't just exist as a precursor to the big finale. Even if Villeneuve never gets to make a sequel, this movie will stand as a glorious cinematic vision of Herbert's Duneverse. Although he brought genuine jump scares and a creepy atmosphere to his zombie-infested rom-com Shaun of the Dead, and Hot Fuzz was as much of a slasher movie as a buddy cop spoof, Last Night in Soho is Edgar Wright's first straightforward horror movie. Fashion student Eloise, Thomasin McKenzie, rents a bedsit in the titular London district and finds herself transported to the swinging 60s every night. She becomes enamored with a couple from that era, aspiring singer Sandy, Anya Taylor-Joy, and her manager Jack, Matt Smith, until she realizes their glamorous life is actually disgustingly seedy. Last Night in Soho is a lot of things. A time travel story, a murder mystery, a love letter to London, a rallying cry against sexual harassment. As is usually the case with movies like that, Last Night in Soho sets out to do too much and ultimately fails to accomplish its ambitions. It has a lot to say, but struggles to pull it all together in a satisfying way. The bright, colourful, sumptuous 60s set sequences are a feast for the eyes. With immersive production design, period-accurate costumes, and a typically awesome soundtrack featuring contemporary artists like Dusty Springfield and the Kinks. The decade hasn't been this lifelike since Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Just as Ridley Scott's The Last Duel has positioned itself as a post-Me Too medieval epic, Wright's movie, co-written with 1917's Christy Wilson Cairns, positions itself as a psychological horror response to the Me Too movement. From the moment she arrives in London, Eloise is ogled and harassed by unsavory men. The taxi driver who takes her to her student housing comments on her legs, intrudes on her privacy, and threatens to stalk her within a few seconds of getting in his cab. But this commentary is clunky. All the movie has to say about sexual harassment is that as bad as it is today, it was even worse in the 1960s. One of the ideas at play in the movie is that bygone eras shouldn't be romanticized because plenty of terrible things were happening back then. This is a strong idea for a horror movie because nostalgia is becoming more and more prominent in today's apocalyptic conditions, and the notion that the past was just as bad or even worse is both unsettling and poignant. Wright does a terrific job of making the 60s sequences less nostalgic and more disturbing throughout the first half of the movie. However, around the film's midpoint, it takes an incredibly on-the-nose turn when Eloise races through the back rooms of a nightclub and it looks like the construction site sex dungeon that Liam Neeson infiltrates in Taken. From the genre riffs of the Cornetto trilogy to the car chase movie mashup of Baby Driver, Wright always wears his influences on his sleeve. The clearest influence on Last Night in Soho is Roman Polanski's Repulsion, in which Catherine Deneuve hallucinates men attacking her in bed and hands coming out of the walls to touch her. But this isn't like Hot Fuzz's take on buddy cop movies or The World's End's nods to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. As Eloise suffers visions of sleazy, aggressive men grabbing for her, Last Night in Soho crosses over from being inspired by Repulsion into being a full-blown rip-off. While they're let down by the script, the star-studded cast gives fantastic performances. Mackenzie is utterly compelling in the lead role, establishing Ellie as a likable everywoman, and eventually taking audiences with her every step of the way as she drifts in and out of reality. Taylor-Joy as a budding performer whose dreams are crushed by a haunting reality, and Smith as a smooth-talking charmer with a harrowing dark side, bask in the historical milieu and bring the gorgeous visuals of the 60s sequences to life. Terrence Stamp gives a memorably sinister supporting performance as a pervy pub patron nicknamed Hansy, while Diana Rigg, in her final big screen performance, the movie is dedicated to her memory, brings out her legendary 6-decade acting career with an unforgettable turn as Ellie's landlady. The final twist reveal is certainly unpredictable. Wright proved in Hot Fuzz that he's a master of the red herring. But that's where the themes fall apart and the movie's message becomes muddled. Leading up to its finale, Last Night in Soho is about women's inability to feel safe in a world filled with violent men. But without giving anything away, the ending completely undermines that. While Last Night in Soho has all the visual flourishes that Wright's fans have come to expect, its script falls short of the airtight storytelling of the Cornetto trilogy, and its approach to delicate subject matter is too jumbled and ham-fisted to have any kind of meaningful impact. The performances are strong, but a top-tier cast can't salvage weak plotting. Common picks for the worst MCU movie are Iron Man 2 and Thor: The Dark World, with the main criticism being that they're generic comic book blockbusters that follow Marvel's familiar cookie-cutter formula to a T. The franchise's latest big screen outing, Eternals, doesn't have this problem, but the problem it does have is arguably even worse. At least the formulaic ones deliver the goods with a hero's journey and a handful of spectacular set pieces. Eternals is less interested in telling a story and more interested in filling in the background of the universe, with long animated segments detailing how the Eternals, the Deviants, and the Celestials all play into the history of the Marvel Universe. Eternals feels more like a Wikipedia article than an actual narrative. One of the most heavily promoted aspects of Eternals is that wherever possible, director Chloe Zhao used real shooting locations and natural light instead of green screens and CGI. Granted, Zhao brings some stunning visuals to the table. She films environments like deserts, forests, and mountains with a subversively muted palette. But sharp imagery alone doesn't make a great movie. Great movies are created by using stunning visuals to complement an engaging plot full of rich, colourful characters. Eternals has the former in spades. What it lacks is the latter. As teased by the trailers, Eternals sees the titular aliens getting the band back together to face a world-ending threat. But getting the band back together takes up the entire movie. After the third or fourth time the Eternals have gone to an isolated hideout, reconnected with an old friend, and explained the entire plot to them, it starts to feel painfully repetitive. The MCU's made-up science has been used to explain away Tony Stark's nanotech, Hank Pym's shrinking suits, and the reason why there's no blood when Captain America frisbees his shield at people. But here it's used to peddle an entirely fabricated alternate origin story for intelligent life. Huge chunks of the movie are committed to providing the title characters with excuses for not getting involved when Thanos came to wipe out half the universe's population, and when slavery and the Holocaust and all the other terrible things happened to humanity. Exposition is a downside of almost all Marvel movies, but Eternals is all exposition. The non-linear narrative structure initially seems like a fun twist as it jumps all over the timeline of human history. It jumps from a village in 5000 BC to present-day London to the charred remains of Hiroshima in 1945, but ultimately all that does is change the time and place in which information is being dumped on the audience. At 157 minutes, Eternals is far too long. Whereas the 3-hour runtime of Avengers Endgame flew by, the 2.5-hour runtime of Eternals feels, well, eternal. Zhao could have easily cut 20 minutes from the movie to tidy up its snail-like pacing. For a movie that begins with ancient alien superheroes learning that they have a week to save Earth from complete annihilation, there's not much of a sense of urgency. As usual, the casting is spot on. Gemma Chan gives a likeable, sympathetic turn as Cersei. Barry Keoghan provides real pathos with Druig's conflicted attitude towards his inability to interfere. Kumail Nanjiani brings the same unearned bravado to Kingo that he brought to Silicon Valley's Dinesh, and has a hilarious back and forth with Harish Patel as his human valet Karun. Zhao directs the cast of Eternals as a true ensemble, never treating Angelina Jolie or Richard Madden like bigger stars than Lauren Ridloff or Don Lee, and the actors share strong enough chemistry for their centuries-old friendships to be convincing. But actors can only do so much with the material they're given. While Eternals' script has plenty of time to explain deep cuts from Marvel mythology, it doesn't have any time for character development. The characters are all thinly drawn archetypes. Icarus, for example, is basically Superman with a Scottish accent, and at the end of the movie they're more or less the same people they were at the start. One of the problems is simply that there are too many heroes. Guardians of the Galaxy found the sweet spot, introducing fans to 5 new characters and giving each of them plenty of room to breathe. Eternals has a whopping 10 main characters, and none of them are interesting or memorable enough to warrant a return in a future MCU project, except maybe Cersei and Kingo. Marvel's last big screen offering, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, was a wildly satisfying superhero adventure and a sign that the MCU's post-Endgame future was bright. Unfortunately, Eternals is a sign of the opposite. It takes so much mental gymnastics to explain how its story can even take place in a post-Endgame world that it begs the question of whether Marvel Studios should have just quit while they were ahead. When Sony announced yet another Ghostbusters reboot after the critical and commercial failure of Paul Feig's 2016 effort, a lot of fans groaned. It didn't seem like we needed another Ghostbusters movie, and the best efforts of gifted comedians like Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy proved that nobody could replace the iconic original quartet of Murray, Aykroyd, Ramis, and Hudson. But the 2016 movie made the mistake of remaking the already perfect original. Naturally, some new, cobbled-together version of 4 paranormal scientists starting up a ghost hunting business and saving New York from a spectral invasion was going to pale in comparison to the 1984 classic. Sony's first attempt at a big-budget reboot just copied everything from the original to much lesser effect. Feig replicated the plot points without replicating the lively spirit that made the original so much fun. Ghostbusters Afterlife, on the other hand, tells its own story with its own characters. Two kids and their single mother are totally different protagonists than a trio of fresh out of college scientists going into business together. A small, dusty town in the middle of Oklahoma couldn't be a more radically different setting than New York City. But what Afterlife lacks in ripped-off plot elements, it makes up for with heart and humour. Afterlife is by far the best Ghostbusters sequel because, unlike the others, it recaptures the spirit of the original. The fact that the new Ghostbusters film is directed and co-written by Jason Reitman, the son of original Ghostbusters director Ivan Reitman, could be accused of nepotism, but the younger Reitman has proven his mettle as a filmmaker with gems like Young Adult and Thank You for Smoking. In Afterlife, he doesn't just emulate his dad's work, he brings his own sensibility to the Ghostbusters universe. From Juno to Up in the Air, Jason Reitman has always gotten laughs out of subtle cues in human behaviour. He doesn't rely as much on improvisation as his dad, which is probably for the best because nobody in this cast or anywhere has the improvisational prowess of Bill Murray, except Murray himself. The story of Afterlife is a passing of the torch narrative about a new generation continuing the Ghostbusters legacy, so it's appropriate that the original director guided his son's vision for it. Above all, this movie is a love letter to Ghostbusters fans from the original creators, through the eyes of a superfan who grew up around them on the set. The trailers for Ghostbusters Afterlife bordered on Force Awakens level nostalgia baiting, but that was seemingly just a ploy to get arses in seats because the actual movie has just the right amount of nostalgia. Reitman doesn't use nostalgia for franchise iconography as a crutch like J.J. Abrams. In The Force Awakens, cool shots of the Millennium Falcon are used to plaster over lazy storytelling. In Ghostbusters Afterlife, proton packs, demon dogs, and baby Stay Puft Marshmallow Men are just familiar Easter eggs layered throughout a script that's more interested in developing its own narrative and the new characters that inhabit it. The film leans heavily into nostalgia in the finale, but by then it's been earned. Much like the previous Ghostbusters reboot, the casting here is spot on. Carrie Coon and Paul Rudd give typically fun, likeable performances as a sardonic single parent and a geeky yet charming seismologist respectively. Finn Wolfhard brings plenty of laughs out of his character's teen angst, like bluntly putting down his sister and disastrously attempting to flirt with a waitress. Logan Kim is a hysterical foil for all his co-stars as Podcast, a motormouth kid who records all his conversations for his long-running conspiracy theory podcast. But as great as these supporting players are, McKenna Grace is the breakout star who gives the movie its heart in the role of Egon's long-lost granddaughter. Grace is best known for playing the younger versions of characters in flashbacks. Captain Marvel, Sabrina Spellman, Tonya Harding, Daphne from Scooby-Doo, the list is endless. But after her revelatory performance in this movie, other actors will be playing the younger version of her in flashbacks. Grace plays Phoebe Spengler with her own take on all the endearing qualities that made Egon so lovable. Awkwardness, unashamed nerdiness, dry deadpan humor.
What do you call a dead polar bear? Anything you want. It can't hear you now.
One of the main ways that Afterlife recaptures the spirit of the original Ghostbusters is its use of classic filmmaking techniques. Feig's reboot created spooks, specters, and ghosts using generic CGI, but Reitman utilizes old-school horror effects like glowing eyes and billowing smoke machines. The music also calls back to the originals, and not just by reusing Ray Parker Jr.'s catchy theme. Rob Simonson's score recreates the otherworldly sound of Elmer Bernstein's original score, essential to the overall feel of Ghostbusters, with spooky theremins. Some tracks even seem to have been lifted directly from Bernstein's score. Nothing could beat the original movie as a comedy, but this one has more feels. Those feels rely heavily on fan service, but Afterlife is still an involving emotional experience. It honors Harold Ramis's legacy beautifully, so much so that the closing For Harold title card is much more than a perfunctory obituary. This movie really is for him. Without spoiling how the original cast members are incorporated, it's perfect. Ghostbusters Afterlife is everything a Ghostbusters movie should be. A fun-filled adventure with kid-friendly jump scares and a handful of hilarious gags drawn from characters and situations. And on top of all that, this one also packs a surprising emotional wallop.
There's something strange in your neighborhood. Who you gonna call?
So there you have it, the lost reviews, finally immortalized, at least until YouTube's servers are commandeered by the AI that will eventually take over the world. So what do you think? Are you glad they're back, or did my bosses make the right call deleting them? Let me know in the comments.
I got touched at the cinema.
That's you?
Wait, you're my subscriber?
Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked the video. Remember to like and subscribe and click on the little bell. And also seize the day and call your mom and be kind to yourself.